Now the news. Opening a kitchen cabinet, a man found he had a full shelf of tinned vegetables with several cans of corn, several of beans, and a few more of tomatoes, carrots, and peas. And as he looked at them, he became, for some reason, uneasy. And after a time spent staring at the cans, to try and relieve his discomfort, he changed around the positions in which the various cans were stacked. Why don't you just put your own headline to this story, since I'm sure that you realize it is not about the order and pattern some guy uses in putting his cans away in the pantry. Right? Son, let me tell you something, said a father to the aforementioned. Life can not only be as it seems, but otherwise as well. A fact few ever realize. For an example, not only do mimes know that they drive people crazy, that's why they become mimes. When the shift closes for the day, lad, here's what's left. Even men's best takes on what they call cause and effect sucks. And we're talking big-time blind inhalation. Now, get on out of here and let your old dad get back to old dad stuff. Headline, another brief dialogue. You know, if you think about it, humans are plagued by a multitude of problems. But if you don't think about it, they're not. Nothing forces verbalization to confront what's actually going on. Like looking at what's actually going on. There are two varieties of seriousness alive on this planet. One is the silent seriousness of physically staying alive, and the other is the verbally expressed sort, unique to man, which is a pretend seriousness. So said one man to himself, I do not believe that what is now needed is any further condemnation of my rambling, unfocused awareness and thought, but rather a solution to the situation. Am I wrong in this? The following tips gave one father to his son. The way to lead a more deliberate life physically would include not to slam things, not to toss things, not to drop things, not to handle things roughly, not to handle things while not looking at them, and not to talk to things. After that, you should then turn all of these hints to your inner life of thoughts. For those with experience sufficient in travels from their own hometown, the fact becomes evident that the various members of their family live their lives in different time zones. Within the rhythm of the music of life, rhythms within rhythms play. A certain man mused, if there were speed bumps on the road of the mind, I would have been awakened 1,000 miles back. And yet another man said, I am astounded by that which I see. While still another one noted, and I by that which I do not. So many arrows, so few targets. We know that the physical, chemical world survives by cannibalizing itself. So why cannot man see a synonymous situation with thought? Men miss the creamy center of their confectionery, saying that what goes around comes around, by not recognizing that the only what there is composed solely of the reoccurring. Ask not for whom the new tolls, for it does so only for the unknowing. There is but one place to look for so-called significance in this life, and that is in the mental world of man, a world which, when once understood, is clearly recognized to be totally without any. In one way, words are the most powerful entity known to man, that is, in their ability to endlessly reproduce their impotent selves. Headline, look, what's that up ahead? Just before an enlightened man becomes really enlightened, he is like a hippopotamus choking on a sesame seed. Did you say up ahead? A man so pondered, having the mind correct itself, is a tricky thing indeed. To which his brother responded, not tricky, impossible, same as in having a brother of yourself. So many voices, so few throats. A man asked a mystic, do you answer questions? And the mystic replied, how can I say no? And the man said, you could have not been a mystic. A correspondent writes to ask if we know of a song with the title, it's hard to know what you're doing if you don't know what you're doing, but it seems even harder to do anything if you do know. He says he's never actually heard of such a ditty, but figures if one does exist, we'd be the ones to know about it. When a man interested in such matters heard that one of the renowned ancient mystical teachers had said, all events are preceded by thought, he thought, I'm either on the wrong track or I've picked the wrong business. What entity within the entire reaches of the universe and reality, other than man's thoughts, would promulgate such an outrageous canard and captious deception as that of saying, all events are preceded by thought? Don't allow your sense of reasonable propriety or belief in the significance of a weak stomach bar you from the recognition that even illusionary cannibals consume their own. Looking into that mirror that no man can hold in his hand, he thought, there is no self, only the actions of that thing we call a self. And we are not working to create a self, but rather to live a deliberate life. Headline, shall we discuss success? Success, did you say? Definition from the land of true freedom. That's all the headline. The destruction of a promising musical career. The definition. Having a hit record which you must thereafter forever perform. And now for some news of a totally different sort. After losing part of his sensibilities in the fire, the man developed what came to be known as the phantom alarm syndrome, whereby he heard the warning beeps of a non-existent smoke detector. Having a hit record you must forever thereafter perform. You start a fire with a match, and then the fire consumes the match. What do you make of that? And a witness sitting ringside finally thought, this fight should have been stopped long ago. Remember this, announced a billboard by the road on the way to the secret monastery, that there is always two levels of mystical activity going on wherever you find it going on. One level is the talking and thinking about it, and the other level is neither of those two, but solely of the doing it. Do, please do, try and remember this, for so few people do. Thank you for your attention, and drive haphazardly as you watch for the turn-off sign up ahead. As pervaded by one afterlife myth, as soon as you expire, you find yourself in line to face the ultimate judge. And when it comes your turn to enter the big courtroom, an angel by the door cautions you to watch your step. And if you show any sign that these words affected your movements in any way, you're instantly turned away and sent to Gerda knows where. To know what you're doing, you've got to know what you're doing no matter what life you're in. Things have meaning only to those who think meaning, and the meaning is no more substantial or permanent than are the thoughts on which it is based. The true and unseen meaning of things is known only to those freed from thinking about their meaning. You don't mean that. Don't editorialize. One man's personal religion and philosophy of life he privately referred to as unhurried. A boy asked his father, "How are we to overcome the mind when there is nothing to the mind but the mind? What is it that I am to employ in this task?" And the elder replied, "A man with any faith in words is like one who confidently folds up his legally printed map, puts it safely in his deepest pocket, and then serenely continues along his lost path." After a silent, separated interval, the lad returned to the old man and said, "But did you not once tell me that any man with any map is already a fool?" And his father said, "Why do these reported conversations between us two have you, the younger, asking the questions, and me, the elder, responding to them?" And again, a silence arose between them before the father added, "Just because the way things are seem to your mind as not only proper, but as the only arrangement whereby they make sense, is not the conclusive proof assumed, in that the mind can play only games of its own invention with goals and restrictions of its own design. To the mind, 2 and 2 are always 4. 2 and 2 always equals 4, but it does so for one simple reason. The mind always equals the mind. At one mystical monastery, at the end of each day, one of the elders would call together all of the monks and to them say, "Okay, to recapitulate what we've learned today would be an insult to us all." Or perhaps, as their more afterlife-interested brethren might put it, there'll be no refresher courses in heaven. While leisurely stretching and good-naturedly yawning, a dog said to a tree, "What an absolutely delightful day to be alive." As opposed to what? As opposed to when puzzled the tree. At the beginning of each day, at one mystical retreat, the head would so address all of the monks, "I guess you wondered why I've called you here." And, "No!" they would all reply. Additional note regarding that statement that thought precedes every action. The body pours, then the mind measures what was poured. I did not label this as a rebuttal to the claim, for the mind can never hear such, and the body does not listen to such. Phone lines were run through one man's yard, in return for which he was allowed to either notice them or not. As it peacefully rose and fell, an ocean said to a gull, "Is it great to be the highest ranking entity on a terrific planet like this, or what?" And as it soared silently away, the bird thought, "How do the waters know that they talk, and that when they speak to me, I never reply?" If consciousness is an orchestra and the mind is rhythm section, then listening to the thoughts that naturally run through it is you letting someone outside your band set the tempos for you. Dizzy would roll over in his grave if dead bodies could move. And upon this idea making its appearance, a man mused, perhaps instead of a revamped rhythm section, what would go best in my brain would be a dead body. All in all, ask yourself, so lit up the message in the sky, what greater proof of stupidity is there than a man taking life seriously? Ask yourself, the message insisted, before the rains come. To cleave to thoughts not of the immediate here and now is to hallucinate. It is to see what isn't there. Says a guy. That helps explain why even ordinary people are nuts and they don't realize it. A boy asked his father, "Is there any type of struggle with yourself that is wasteful and improper?" "Yes," replied the elder, "if you come to see it for yourself." "And what type of struggle would that be?" asked the lad. "Any type," he replied, "if you see so for yourself." He reminded. A man complained to a mystic, "Since I've undertaken the observation of my thoughts, it seems as though they have multiplied and thus disturb me even more than before." To which the latter replied, "Since you can only think sequentially of one thing at a time, this is not possible. It is something else that you are experiencing." Believing that you can awaken the mind will cause you to forget what you look like and lead you in pursuit of your reflection. After observing his son wrestle with a certain idea for some time, the father touched him on the shoulder and said, "It's not so much a matter of there being no meaning to life as it is that there is no meaning to your thoughts about life." A guy on the street walked up to a man and demanded, "Are you happy?" And the man replied, "I wasn't until you made me answer that." When you're not clinging to thought, you then only care about what you really care about. Life speaks to man in a special way that he does not hear when he is talking to himself. The more that you let thought pass unencumbered through you, the more you think that it be you. There is nothing new to be discovered, only new uses for that which you already possess. Conversation, in 3-4 times perhaps. Nothing is better for one's sight than deliberate silence. Do you mean one's eyesight? What other kind is there? In matters of import, words do not so much reveal as they do stain the outline of the subject at hand. One day, a man who had long been involved in activities such as this, but whose successes or not we will not note, had the thought, "It certainly is easy to make more out of enlightenment than there is." Then upon further reflection said, no, Although I understand what I mean by that, it's not actually so. Definition: the great struggle to awaken. The taking of what everyone else considers serious as foolish and what everyone else considers foolish as worthy of note. A lad inquired of his dad, "Does anyone in the world really know what's going on?" "For sure," he replied, "none of those who say they do." A toad asked a prince, "In chasing enlightenment, what have you done but substitute a bunch of new thoughts for your old bunch?" Oh, that's pig. Croak. Under certain conditions, thinking could save your life, but it does not lead your life. More definitions. The great mystical work. Illusionary maps of imaginary places. It has been noted on 1,000 monastery bathroom walls that a man is enlightened in the blink of an eye, but then it takes the rest of his life for him to figure out what it means. That's 1,000 walls plus or minus. Having no thoughts, said a mystic, in the sense that I mean it, does not mean that you have no thoughts, but rather that you do not think of your thoughts as having any significance whatsoever. This, in the extreme, is having no thoughts. Another definition: the great mystical activity. Illusionary escapes from imaginary snares. In the mystical sense, to not care is to not care about your thoughts. Another dialogue. Sure is quiet in here. Welcome home. To escape the aimlessness of wordy thought is to realize the fullness of the silently empty. And finally, a boy asked his father, "Is a sham man a happy man?" "If the condition is deliberate," he replied. And as if that weren't enough regarding man's tour of life, this other guy has begun to think of his periodic states of being more conscious as, "I fired my guide." A very, I'm sure, intriguing inside information. I willfully, knowingly calm down some of what I say on the nights we're videoing. The time we're doing this, circa 19, whatever the hell it is. We're being seen on several dozen stations. And it's like once a week, and who knows who tunes in. And I continue to take into consideration just the common, collective, vague sensibilities as they generally exist in this day and in this time, in this era, and in this area. I do so probably at no avail, to no avail, and to no profit. And tonight is very close, some of the items that we have, some of what I talk about on video. If any of you are interested, I talk about more directly on other nights when we are not videotaping. And some of the items tonight are about specifically the area that I have been talking about off of video, which is the heart of all this kind of activity from one view. And that is another state, or a description of another state of consciousness. In fact, the very state that you ordinary people who might be watching this, who believe that you're involved with some sort of New Age, mystical, or just fairly conventional religious activity. What you don't realize, and that I generally refrain from putting it this bluntly, that it slipped into these news items. By the way, speaking of that, I was informed by the writers of the show before we went on that all the news items tonight, that all of them were in some way, are you ready for this? Were connected. I knew you'd get I couldn't resist. At any rate, it's not my business. But if you noticed and recall, there were 4 or 5 news items having to do with the possible significance of life, the meaning of life, and several that specifically referred to apparently not caring or had the term not caring in it. And you began to speak of that, and I am not the first one to ever use such terms. Some of the so-called sacred scripture thousands of years ago that is right there in white and black and sometimes colored inks, saying the same thing, but then generally it will be followed up, however it got there. Whatever publisher, copyist, monk, having to make a living being a transcriber, the mind cannot help it. Someone continually puts in caveats, footnotes regarding how not caring certainly has nothing to do with not caring about your fellow man and the many, the infinite probably problems that plague poor humans. That is, if I could say bullshit on the videotape, that is just bullshit. It is not understood, but there is a description, there is a telling, if you can hear it, of the absolute limitations of the human mind that apparently, in this case, are established by senses of decency, propriety, perhaps of a divine revelation that we just should care about our fellow man, and it's actually beyond question. We all do care about our fellow man. It is our sacred duty to care more, and that all activities, obviously religious, are involved in some way with the caring. That's the only reason people would be religious from many views, and that those who become involved with activities they assume such as this will end up, almost without exception, believing, at least professing to believe, if they've got enough time to get around to actually doing anything is another question, but professing to believe without any doubt again that the heart of all attempts to change one's state of consciousness, to awaken, to achieve enlightenment, to see what's going on in life, in some way entails the responsibility, an awakened responsibility, an increased awareness of the responsibility to care about the plight of your fellow humans. And it's ridiculous. It's not true. So I don't have to say BS. It's not true. Anyone who's ever been in that state knows it's not true. You cannot get an ordinary man's mind to give any heed to this. It's not supposed to, and it will, as a reactionary, a mechanical reactionary reaction, will reject it. It is, as we call it in the cosmic mystical business, it's the trampoline effect. You drop the idea and it bounces right off. It is the silicone covering on all ordinary states of consciousness to keep certain ideas out of the frying pan, out of the mix. Well, right quick, consider this is not, for you people on video, it is not by any means a condemnation of any sort. It's not even a small criticism of religion, human nature, society, sociology, psychology, or wholesale tire, automobile tire operations, or the fishing industry, per se. Now, if we're not talking about per se, that's another matter, but I don't have time to get into that tonight. But you have got to be aware, if you are semi-literate and sophisticated, that caring about your fellow man, caring about the plight of humanity, I should make it more expansive, to take in all possible philosophies. That is the most general view and statement of it, not just your individual person, but concern over the plight of man. That is, by all accounts, from all ordinary views, the zenith of evidence of one's humanity, of one's insight, of one's consciousness. That inversely, those who express no awareness, no concern over the plight of their fellow man, if you will notice, over the plight of humanity, you will notice they are, always have been, they are, as political observers or sociologists would refer to it, they are always at the back of the life's evolutionary parade. They are at the bottom of the socio-economic spectrum or scale or ladder, as they refer to it, that it is always, such attitudes are always identified with people who have a lot to learn. People at the bottom of the barrel of civilization, people who are uneducated, unsophisticated. And it's only such people, which even those who do care about the plight of humanity, of course, then they have to be sure and say, listen, we're not criticizing these poor people. It's not their fault that they're stupid. We mean uneducated. It's not their fault. But it is a known dynamic that the degree to which a person is oriented in life by the mind rather than the body, to the same degree that they are thusly driven, and that is their compass, to that degree, that same degree, a matching degree, they express concern over the plight of humanity. And withal, with the lack and a decreasing, such a decreasing concern going in the other direction, is when you find the people uneducated, unsophisticated, and they are the only ones who will display just a complete lack of concern, or if asked, deny they have any. That's not my problem. And people have tried to deal with this in all sorts of ways. The obvious one, the easiest one being for the mind, is to say, well, these people are already at the bottom of the barrel. They don't have time to be charitable. We have people here who are starving and living on perhaps even a substandard level of subsistence, and so they do not have time to be concerned. You cannot take a starving person in some undeveloped area and expect them to be worrying about starving people in other undeveloped areas. So that's their explanation. The truth is this, that so here I am about to censor myself and dolly it up, or put the dollies on the furniture for you guests, so that you'll come in and find, if the furniture be a bit off-putting, the design surprising, at least we have sort of old-fashioned, a few dollies laid here on the arms of the chairs, maybe a few old photographs, old tintypes, archetype tintypes, of concerned-looking old women with buns in their hair, look like your elementary school teacher, or perhaps a stern Puritan minister looking down, to make you feel more at home. Let me address the broad one first. If you are not driven by thought, and you look out at life, there are no problems. There are no problems plaguing man, other than the obvious one, if you call it a problem, staying alive. But I submit to you that it takes a bruised intelligence, a bruised understanding, let me say, even for a very otherwise intelligent, educated man, to even say that staying alive is in any way a problem, because the same kinds of minds will turn right around in a more childish pique, and perhaps in defense of themselves or some action they've taken will say, well, I didn't ask to be born. Put them both together, and they spell, mother, send me home, or send me some money. But not to a grocery store that does not stay open all night. That's the trick, of course. To say that staying alive is a problem, this is not important, but I was pointing out that if you see it, it is another glaring example that men do not deserve. The ordinary mind does not deserve any sort of description as being insightful, intelligent, being able to comprehend at all what's going on. Because who would claim that it's a problem to stay alive when it's obvious that it was not your problem being born? Suddenly one day, your brain started firing off the correct chemical and electrical combinations with the right connections, and as far as you're concerned, you began. Your parents said, well, you've been around here several years, you just didn't know. Oh, you're just a cute little tub of lard, and you went, but now that you can think, as I believe it's loosely called in the Western Hemisphere, now that as soon as you can think, to you, that's when life began. But how can you call it a problem staying alive since then? You've got to be an idiot to call it a problem. You could have killed yourself anywhere along the way. You can do so now. Anyone can kill themselves. I know I say that, and I'm aware of the fact that any time they run out of horoscopes or train wrecks or something silly in the newspaper, there's always, they can come up with it somewhere, a filler somewhere that today or this week, some guy, some woman somewhere tried to kill themselves and failed. That always, I've never been around an ordinary person reading it, but obviously that must titillate people somewhere in some way to read about a guy, locks himself in a room, has a .357 Magnum, puts it to his head, and fails. Fires off a round and lives through. And about the worst it does is ruin his hair for the rest of his life, to where he can't ever get a decent haircut and he looks like hell. And maybe one eyelid droops. It always gets a laugh. Like, talk about a loser. I mean, the person's already decided that life's not worth living. I'll never amount to anything, and he proves it. He can't even kill himself. Of course, I submit is why those are so popular and people enjoy them, because it does represent, if nothing else, exactly what I described. But at any rate, it is ridiculous. I don't know what else to call it. I shouldn't call it anything. I should just look at the camera and wink like, huh? To call staying alive a problem. So let's dismiss that. Because if you call staying alive a problem, if you consider that a problem, and you got no business listening to this, you're not going to get anything I say. It's not a problem, but put at best, to make a verbal comparison, which we must to make the words even bounce off your trampoline in a beneficial manner, is you could say that the only thing that would represent the problem, if there was one, would be staying alive, but we've already dismissed that. Everything else, if you do not think about, as the news item said, it was a conversation, that something had already been said about problems and et cetera, maybe it'll make more sense now. It was one of the earlier news items. Let's say right now I reread the news item, that after I've been talking as I have the last few minutes, and now here's a conversation that we heard over here in the corner of the studio, or afterwards, and one guy says, when you do think about it, man is plagued by a multitude of problems. And his buddy goes, yeah, but if you don't think about it, he's not. That's it. I say that's it. Of course, if you sit there and think about it, that's not it. Because your mind goes say, well, that's not it. What the hell are you talking about? But if you can cease to cling to thought, which would be a state of heightened consciousness, extended would be what's always been called satori and enlightenment, but it is simply a fact. I just stated outright. There's been enough people on the planet that's experienced it. What you see is not a problem. Now, I'm not going to say, after that, people who have got glimpses of this, it is very common. Or for those of you on tape, let me point, those who actually see this head on and then sometime throughout the rest of their life not only were awakened to what's going on, but then had the time and spent the effort to make sense of it. They do not say anything. The most they would say is about what I've said, that there are no problems. But they don't say anything after that. What you hear after that in the so-called mystical literature throughout the ages are people who may indeed have had moments of being freed from thoughts, that they had, you could say, temporary moments of awakening, of freedom, but it was not, they did not extend it, they settled there, they did not struggle to understand any more than that, etc. They are the only ones who say anything after that. They are the ones that you have always read about. The Holy Scriptures of all religions are full of it, always referring to the afterlife. But all of the publicly well-known mystical literature will always follow up, even after saying, well, I awoke, or I was enlightened, and I looked out, and just like Buddha, Abraham, somebody, I looked out and I realized men do not suffer. Men do not have problems. Life is not a problem. Then you got to hold on to your drawers because it's a comma or a dash. And then they began to rhapsodize about the beauties of being one of God's little creatures, of being enlightened, of being alive, of how it is all just one big, generally unrecognized ball game, beer and pretzels, a polka dance, a night of bingo at the Amvets. That's just as bad, because it's none of that. You lie to even say that there are no problems, because when you open your mouth, if you recall the definition of a liar, or the identification from our field guide is someone whose lips are moving, is lying. So it's even a lie for me to say there are no problems. But it is a serious, we could call that a misdemeanor, but it becomes a felony to say anything after that. To say that there are no problems is to give those who might benefit from it a hint, a slight nudge. But if you say anything after that, you're just pouring salt into a blind man's sockets. You're making the matter worse. Whatever possibility there was of a salubrious hint, a helpful suggestion, is now eradicated. So I'm not telling you what life is. I'm not capable. No one is. If you think anyone is or has been capable, there's no hope for you. No one can say what life is. There's nothing to say. But about the least offensive trespass, as I said, I guess a misdemeanor in this sense, would be to point out that there are no problems. Man does not have problems. And all you have to do is be free from thought. You want to be, and be free from thought, and there's no doubt about it. There are no problems. Then, what I was going to point out, men do not realize it, but those who claim to be struggling for some other state of awareness, and at a very superficial level, and a level at which nothing is really going to happen, but I was going to say people who claim to take their religion seriously. Men who believe or claim to believe that religion should have some payoff in this lifetime besides the big jackpot after you die, that it might be possible to at least be a better Christian, Jew, Muslim, whatever it is, in this lifetime. What they do not realize is that it is absolutely verbally contrary to every expression, to every description that they would make. And that's for me to say this: if indeed someone could actually live a Jewish, a Muslim, a Christian, a Buddhist, a Zoroastrian life, they wouldn't care about anything. Just the opposite, verbally, of what people believe. That in fact people believe this, all religions, one way or the other, that one of the ways to increase the possibility of you living a more religious life, a better life, if you did care more. There's nothing to care about. See, that's the first folly. Or for someone attempting to do this, it's the first trap. It's the first ignorance. Because if you do not think, there are no problems, there's nothing to care about. And every time you start this, if you do, no one, the mind cannot believe, any civilized mind, and I know this in advance, it's the way it's supposed to be, and it's not going to change. I'm not trying to change ordinary people's minds. But the mind will reject the idea that life has no meaning or that you should not care about life. It's just ridiculous, and there's nothing else to say to ordinary minds, except I did add a bit in 2 news items tonight that you might find could act as a slight lubricant and you slipping a bit closer to the experienced reality of not caring, of being freed from thought, and that is that I had a father saying to a son that he'd observed had been wrestling over a certain matter, which was this matter. And he poked the kid and he said, look, try it like this. Try thinking about it, try looking at it like this. It's not so much a matter that life has no meaning as it is a matter that your thoughts about life are totally without significance. It's your thoughts have no meaning. That is the way to another state of consciousness, or that's part of the way. That is what a man goes through, is to realize that to say that there is no meaning to life, again, is at least a misdemeanor. You do not normally hear that even coming from the religious literature, the publicly written, even by those of limited understanding. The only time you generally hear that in the public marketplace is from ordinary people who are simply pissed off about being alive. It's just a nihilistic attitude. Only ordinary people ordinarily say, hey, life doesn't have any meaning. And there's ordinarily people, again, who have very little intellectual investment in life, that the center, the place in which their foot is nailed to the floor, on which they continue to run around in circles for 70 years, that place is normally somewhere around their belly or their pelvis and not their brain, not their cerebral cortex. And so they're the ones who say that. It is meaningless. For the statement to be made publicly that life has no meaning, no one even in the ordinary world, no ordinary mind takes that seriously. Most people won't even bother to respond to it. If they do, they might make one response to whoever said it like, oh, you don't mean that. And the guy says, yeah, I do. And they realize, well, he's an idiot. I can't talk to him. So it does not stir up any great following. Never has, but it's not a new statement. But the statement itself really tells you nothing. The statement is incomplete. To say that life has no meaning. If you could say that to your stomach, if you could say that to your sex organs, if you could say it to your body, and your body had no talking brain, then the idea is fallacious. If your body could hear, even though it doesn't have a brain, and you told your body, or if you even told your body, if it could hear words, and you said, you realize there has been a raging and a continuing debate over whether life has meaning or not, what do you think of that? Your body would rightfully now think, you're idiots. You people are idiots. Of course, not you people, it's you brains. It's you people in the penthouse. It's this operation upstairs. If that's what you're doing, you're an idiot. You know, I'm glad I can't talk. I'm glad I can't hear. I'm glad that I don't have to listen to that shit. I'm glad I don't have to put up with that. I'm glad that I live your life. You should be glad. A whole range of things, but mainly your body would just say, you idiots. It's just foolish. You notice I didn't say yes or no. But I'm saying if the body, and that's not as far-fetched an allegory, or an allegory, as it may sound, because you can feel that. When you're hungry, the idea of you eating to satisfy your hunger doesn't even, no question, even verbally or otherwise, arises, is it meaningful to eat? All this becomes silly if I reduce it any further. It becomes silly back to the basis of, if there was a problem to life, the problem is to survive. But only the mind will express it as a problem. The body does not find it a problem. The body is either alive or it's dead. It's either surviving or it's not, but surviving is not a problem. There's nothing to think about, and if you don't think about it, there's no problem, if you can't think about it. So the idea of saying to the mind, to the body, if it could hear, and you say, there's a discussion. Humans, you know who humans are in the body? they have a continuing debate. It gets stronger and stronger, and it takes up much of their time, and it seems to be of some possible real significance as to whether life has meaning or not. And if the body could hear that and knew what it meant, that's really better than me saying it would think you idiots, but it would. But notice, I am not saying that the body would go, well, you're wrong, or the body's saying you're right, because it's neither. It's just. So now back to an awakened man, a real Jew, a real Christian, a real Buddhist, a more conscious man, not only would not be concerned and not care about the plight of humanity, he would know there's nothing to care about because he would not think about it. And if you do not think about it, you cannot be blinded by it. You don't think that life is supposed to have meaning unless you think about it. It is only the mind that thinks, what's the meaning of this? And it doesn't even seem to catch a hint that after thousands of years of asking it, it still doesn't have a question. It's no closer. I always like to throw that in. It's meaningless. Well, to try and, even for you people on video, to try and leave on a potentially useful note, I guess it's easy, I know it is, for me to say that if you were not clinging to thought, anybody on this planet, if you wanted to, if you had any desire to, and you were able to not cling, if you were able to let go, to not listen to the thoughts running through your mind for a reasonable, let's say several minutes, and you specifically took on the task of checking out what I've just said in general about there's no problems to life, there's no reason, not only, since there's no problems, there's no reason to be concerned. People, humanity, are not suffering from problems, they're not there, there's no reason to care. It's all as imaginary as thought. If you could stop thought for, let's say, several minutes, and you wanted, if you were trying to see, you would realize it. It is that simple, that if you're not thinking, there are no problems. You don't see any problems, you feel no problems. What I was going to point out that ultimately, looked at from one view, for that to be of use is to realize, this is just one way to look at it, but it's to take note of this. If it be true that if you were not clinging, not listening to the thoughts that run through your mind, that you would not have any question as to what's the meaning of life, you would not have any concern, you would not care. Let me be blunt again. You would not care about anything other than surviving. And that's not the mind caring anyway. You would not care about anything. Then if you look at this backwards, if you try to work your way back, sort of, then take note of this. What you do think about, the thoughts that run through your mind, are always about something external to you. It's always about events, objects, people. It's about that your thoughts might as well have an invisible line tied to what you perceive, what you think of as being the external world. Other people, other events, past events, upcoming events, people alive, people dead, but they're all tied to this. Everything you think about is in response to what thoughts consider to be out there. What if you refused? What if you abandoned simply those thoughts? That you would not cleave to those thoughts? That you recognize that you took it upon yourself, if you could understand, if you get a glimpse of it, in advance, that all you have to watch for is responding to the thoughts in you, to cleave to those, to give them any notice, any thoughts that are in response to external affairs. That all you've got to do is let go of those. Ignore those. Let the rest, we'll worry about that some other time. Just ignore those. And there's the... Just to treat that. And people think it's very hard to, even if they're interested in such as this, that, oh my God, what a complicated. It's no harder in that sense than it would be to stop some bad habit. Biting your nails. Giving up coffee. Some little gesture that you always do. That you simply will stop listening to those particular thoughts. If you do that, there's no question about the meaning of life, and you don't care. As I said, looking at backwards, you're caring about things outside of you to start with, even though it's imaginary. Your thoughts, what do they care about? Now, to also submit, if you look for yourself and check it, but most of what constitutes the thoughts running through a man's mind, a large part, with most people, is in response to what's going on out there. Much of it nowadays is in response to what other people say, since you're exposed to it so much by electronic and printed media now, that it's responding to ideas you've heard, comments you've heard, even if you're not hearing them electronically produced, or if you're seeing them off the printed page or off the screen of your computer. It is your thoughts. Look how much of it is taken up. Think about it. Responding to all this. Reacting to it. If you don't like responding, somewhere in between. You've got to be able to see what I'm saying. If it wasn't for that going on, how about this? Your mind wouldn't have anything to do. That sounds theoretical, but think about it right quick. You have to do it quick or your mind will fool you with it. But if you did not think about what's going on with other people, if you stopped all forms of what amounts to neural gossip, if you stopped it, what would your mind do? What would it have, based on what's going on now, what thoughts would be left? If you can see this in your own way, you can look at this, I can be even stronger. You can look at it as being the enemy, in an allegorical sense. That is your one problem. That's the one enemy, that's the one foe, is look at it this way. And nothing specific, but your thoughts always responding to that. That's all I got to do is quit paying attention to that, and I'll be okay. And you will. And you find out you don't care, that there is no meaning to it, and there's nothing to care about. Until you're back at it. Now you are smoking again, picking your nose, biting your nails. No, I'm not. That's true, it's worse. It's worse than I thought. This horse will never run again.